Carson, Leno, Fallon. Now, it's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are on an away game today in beautiful Napa Valley, Yountville to be specific. And a shout out to the Vintage Estate Hotel. If you're coming to Napa, you got to hang in Yountville and you got to hang at the Vintage Estate. It's a great place. Prices are great. Service is incredible. Food is great. And that's why we're here today. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you have for your podcasting. Please subscribe and say something nice in your review. If you have nothing nice to say, don't say it at all. But have a listen. I just got done with a podcast with John Wilkinson, the proprietor and founder of an amazing project called Bin to Bottle. If you want to be in the wine business, this is the place to start. Have a listen coming soon. But not while we're here. Here to have a conversation with Nova, and I should have said this before, Cadamarte.
Cadamarte.
Right, exactly what I said. Cadamatre. Italian, yes. Wow, okay. So your French probably isn't, but I was going to say, oh, you must be French. Cadamarte.
A lot of, it's funny, when I first started dating my husband, that was one of the first things I asked him. I said, how do you say your last name?
Okay, that's funny. Well, I guess I had the same problem. Right?
Yeah,
12 letters. Anyway, Master of Wine, winemaker, educator, CEO at Trestle 31 Winery in Fingerlakes, New York. Wine author. What else don't you do in the world of wine? I mean,
in the world of wine, I've covered a lot.
Did you went to Cornell?
Yes.
Did you go to the enology school there?
Yes. So my undergrad is in viticulture with a minor in enology, and I was one of the first undergrads out of Cornell because they've had a master's program for quite some time, but the undergrad program didn't come about until about 2004 is when they officially announced it.
Well, I'm very proud to say I had an intern over the summer. Her job during her work was to write the talking points of the podcast, just like this one, particularly when a female came into the office or into the studio. And she applied and she got accepted. And they just posted today pictures of her in front of this bottle wall that must be on campus somewhere.
That's awesome.
And so she's very excited about it. And I kind of hope that we sort of inspired her to do that.
That's very cool. Yeah. Now, is she in the hotel school or in the ag school? Oh, great. Fantastic.
Yeah. I had her meet with Molly Hill at Sequoia Grove when she was there. And she got inspired. Her parents built this little 100 vine, maybe 150 vine winery in Southern California. Mm-hmm. They've been making wines from there. And she got the bug. Nice. Young.
Well, that's what happens. I mean, I started when I was 20. Yeah. So I was a outdoor display intern down at Longwood Gardens in Pennsylvania. And actually, when I was working on my associate's degree, so my associate's degree is in greenhouse management. It's ornamental horticulture greenhouse management. And obviously, I've never used that.
I was just going to say, wait a minute. I don't think I've ever heard that before.
No.
Go ahead. We'll talk about it.
But so I went to Morrisville State, and while I was there, one of the classes I took was plant pathology, and I had to write an essay about diseases. And my previous specialty was roses, and my teachers were like, you need to figure out something other than roses to write about. And so I Googled, because Google was a thing at the time, what plants get similar diseases to roses. And so, of course, grapevines popped up. And around the same time, my husband said, oh, we should start a vineyard. My family in Italy did it. It can't be that hard. And so I was like, oh, well, this is perfect. I will research how hard it is to grow grapevines at the same time I'm writing this paper, and it's not on roses, and it will make everybody happy.
That is fascinating.
And so I did this paper, and I think I covered like the downy mildew, powdery mildew, black spot, Pierce's disease, like I don't know, just a few things that attack grapevines. And you think like most people talk about how they got in the wine industry is like some amazing wine they had an experience with, and no, mine was like, oh yeah, I wrote a paper on everything that comes after grapes.
I try to avoid that part of the conversation. Like, what was your aha moment in wine business? I had this great Burgundy from 1959.
Right.
But tell me something about this. You did the academic side of it, which is really fascinating, and then you did the reality part of it. Were they aligned?
Generally, yes. Because Cornell's program is quite practical, so even though we were learning the book side of it, like our labs were, going out with Andrew Landers and learning how to calibrate a sprayer. And, so like we came out of the program not only having the book knowledge, but also having the hands-on capabilities of just going to a cellar. Because on the East Coast, like you can't not work in a cellar. Like you have to be able to go and do stuff.
Yeah,
and,
that's right.
And quickly, so when I did my first harvest in 2003, I was in Pennsylvania working at this internship, and I got done about 2:30 in the afternoon. I started calling all these wineries, and I said, hey, I'll come work for free if you tell me what you're doing and why.
I never got those kinds of calls from people.
Well, I mean, people love free labor,
Yeah,
and I
that's
loved
right.
learning. And so every day somebody would call me and say, hey, we're harvesting Chardonnay today, come help us. Or, hey, we're racking this tank of Merlot today, come help us. Or, I'm disgorging traditional method sparkling wine today, come help. So I just got a lot of like little introductions into winemaking through that, and viticulture as well, because I was out in the vineyard some as well. And started looking at coming out here to either Fresno or Davis for, viticulture and enology, because at the time those were the two schools.
Yeah, was it?
And while I was down there doing that, Cornell announced that they were putting in this undergrad program for viticulture. And I was like, oh, this is fantastic. I'm already accepted to Cornell. I wasn't really sure what I was going to major in. And voila.
How serendipitous.
Yeah. And so I changed my major from horticulture to viticulture, and then the rest is history.
Well, you're making the history now, doing these amazing things. But that doesn't, you spent your undergrad, which is arduous, and it's Ivy League schools and biology and practical winemaking. But then you went on to get your Master of Wine. And for the listeners, the Master of Wine, I consider one of the great credentials in this industry. 400 or so in the world.
Yep, a little over 400 right now.
And maybe 150 women or 300 women.
We're getting close to about half and half, women and men.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. It's nice to see that. Very few of us are winemakers, so I think there's only about 30 to 40 winemakers in the 400.
Yeah, that part's fascinating part.
And then, of course, when you narrow down how many are women winemakers, there's even few. I think maybe 5 to 6 of us are there. Yeah.
So let's go back to the academia. You obviously love to learn, as you said, and
Yes.
so here, I think the Master of Wine is a very focused version of that idea.
Yes.
How long did it take you to do that?
It took me 8 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the minimum's like 5, right?
The minimum is 3. Like if you're just a freaking genius and
you have to be a genius.
you walk through and not even just a genius, but like just you have everything it takes to.
And why
walk
did
in and pass.
you went to school? You didn't need to prove anything to anybody unless you felt that this was a platform to move your career or just learn more. Which one was it?
All of the above.
All of it. Yeah.
So when I learned about the Master of Wine program, I had just gotten out of Cornell. So I graduated in 2006 from Cornell and moved out here to California and took a job with Constellation down in the Central Valley making sparkling wine. So Cook's sparkling wine.
Good old Cooks. Yeah.
Oh yeah, 2 million cases a year. So I was doing that, and I was not particularly loving the part of the industry I was in. I really wanted to be up here in Napa, Sonoma, and making like amazing high-end wines and very boutique-y wines, because that's what I was doing on the East Coast, and I really loved that. And so I thought, well, if I can differentiate myself somehow and really prove to people I really know what I'm talking about, because that was the other thing I kept getting is like, oh, before you were born, this was happening, and you haven't been in the industry long enough, and you don't really know what you're talking about. And I was like, okay, if an Ivy League education doesn't give me the credential I need, what will? And I was like, okay, this is something that not very many people have. It is the pièce de résistance of wine knowledge in the industry. I'm going after that. And if I still can't get recognition for what I know and what I can say at that point, then oh well.
I'll go into candy making.
but yeah, no. So that really was the onus around it, and the fact that I always feel like cellar palate is a real risk with winemakers, and I never wanted to kind of fall into that habit of just going, oh well, what I'm making is great, and not really know what everybody else is doing around the world.
Right.
It's not enough to just know what your neighbors are doing. Like you need to know globally what's happening. And so that was another way for me to really keep on top of what's happening in markets that I don't even work in, and it helps me bring things from other parts of the world into my winemaking that wouldn't otherwise find its way there.
It's interesting that you these credentials have been around. Michael Broadbent had one of the first Master of Wines, right? And so it seemed back then it was about the passion of just learning more, a platform to do that. And then it's also now become sort of a career move, like you said, but yours was more earnest in that you're trying to get recognition so that you can do the things you want to do.
Right.
I think so much of what happens in the academic side of wine is, well, I'm going to get my MW, not an MW really, let's just say my DIPS WSET or whatever, and I'm going to have this amazing career in front of me, and that's not really the case always,
True.
right?
Yeah.
Because you explained it, the experience of this industry is so important to move the needle on what you're doing, and to get the experience, now you need some kind of credential.
Yep.
I mean, it's even got to the point in the wholesale side that you have to have a minimum of WSET or one or two just to go sell wine.
Yeah.
And, the people I would see over 35 years of tasting, most of them didn't care.
Well, back when I did the WSET, nobody had heard of it.
Yeah, right.
It's like the only reason I knew about it was because I was trying to get into the Master of Wine program. And they said, we highly recommend that you go through the WSET program before coming into the MW program. And I was like, okay, if that's the prerequisite, then I'm going to do it. I'm going to do that. So that's...
You have an uncanny skill to pick up a book and start learning.
Right,
That's hard for a lot of people to do.
Exactly. I love it. I love being able to learn. And so 2007, I got my advanced and started my diploma in 2008. And then did my second year of the diploma and first year of the MW at the same time, which I don't recommend to anybody, in 2009. And then got my diploma in 2010 and also sat the MW exam for the first time in 2010.
So anecdotally,
yes,
I think we come back from New York. I was in Manhattan. And I got it. I was logged on the Wi-Fi on the plane. I got an email from the Master of Wine program saying, hey, do you want a Master of Wine? I'm like, yeah, I do. Now, I'm at that time probably 62. So it's probably a little late to get started, but I thought I'll fill in the form. So I fill in the form, and then I get the test thing. And you buy 3 wines, and then you write about the wines, and then fortunately, one of the questions was about packaging of wine, which I'm keenly aware of for a lot of reasons. We might talk about that here. And so they loved my essay, and some of the points I made about packaging. Hated my tasting notes, and then this sort of idea that, you should have done this first popped up. I go, look, I didn't ask. You sent me an email and said, do you want to be?
Right.
It's that easy.
It is that easy. Yeah. I always say, it's the right time in a person's life. So I never like to say, it's too late to do it. Because, there's a real self-satisfaction in going through the program. And you meet so many amazing people and you learn so much fun stuff. And you have so many amazing experiences, even just being a student. Like for me, I failed out of the program after my 5th time sitting the exam, and I actually went back into the program again to finally get it.
Wow,
but
what perseverance. Let's touch on that for a second.
Having failed out,
yes.
I gained so much just from being a student that I was not horribly devastated. I was upset, but I was like, you know what? I got what I came in to get. And I feel good about where I am. Yeah. So, I always recommend that people, think about the value of the program even beyond coming out with the letters.
So let's touch that real fast, and then we'll get into some real stuff here. But when you fail out, and I want people to understand that the listeners, that you have so many chances to take the final exam, which has a very low pass rate.
Yes, 3%.
And how many times can you take it before they say, sorry, you got to start over?
So you can take it up to 3 times as long as you pass one of the parts, so either practical, which is the tasting portion, or theory, in the first 3 chances, then you have a total of 5 chances. Okay. So I didn't pass either one until my 3rd attempt. So that was my last attempt, and I passed theory that year. And then I had 2 more attempts at practical, neither of which were successful. And so then I was out of the program and was planning to stay out of the program. And an amazing MW, DC Flint. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's fantastic. He came up to me and he was asking about how the program was going, and I was like, I'm out, DC. I'm not, I'm done. I'm moving on. I'm doing other stuff. And he was like, no. That's not how this ends for you.
Wow, that's very encouraging and inspiring.
And he was like, you need to come back. We all want another crack at getting you across the line. Like, let's make this happen.
Well, great support.
Yeah, and it was really... It just was a nice vote of confidence that he really felt like I could do it. Yeah. And so So, yep, I came back, and luckily I was able to sit the exam that year, because I told him, I was like, look, if I got to go through the whole first year, it's called stage 1 now. I'm still in the old school language of first year, second year, third year. If I got to go through all the stage 1 stuff again, that's like, I'm not wasting a time doing that. And they were like, no, you got far enough along, you can come back as a stage 2 and sit the full exam, because you're going to lose your theory pass. So I had to sit the entire exam over again. And the 6th time I sat the exam, it was both theory and practical, and I was able to pass both that time.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah.
That's perseverance.
It is. And
Calvin Coolidge.
Half of it is perseverance. That is true of nearly everything in life.
Totally. All right, let's get into some practical stuff, because I think this is fascinating what you're doing, because you're in the Finger Lakes of New York, and you're in Napa,
Yes.
and then I read that you were in Ohio.
Yes.
And so, so much of our industry, particularly the winemaking side, in the sense of is historical, not from the sense of there's some kind of story, but that to understand a place to grow wine takes time.
Yes.
It takes years of testing. You only get one chance a year to do it. And you're in the Finger Lakes. How long have they been making wine there? And where do you think it is in regards to its sort of potential?
Evolution. Yeah. So it depends on, prohibition is a key factor here, because pre-prohibition, New York State was the Champagne of the United States. Like, there was a lot of wine being made there. Was it good? Probably not. One could argue it's not. But post-prohibition.
You're talking 1933.
Yeah. Post-prohibition, the industry as we know it today really kind of started in the 1970s. That was when Dr. Konstantin Frank came in from the Ukraine, and he was like, I think we can really grow vinifera here. Whereas previously everybody was like, no, it's too cold, you can't grow vinifera here. But he really had faith that you could. And his story is amazing. If you haven't read about him, he came over, didn't speak any English, worked as a janitor in the Geneva Research Station in Geneva, New York, and until he could learn the language well enough to.
Wow.
But he was like a PhD in grapevine genetics or something from the Ukraine, and so he was just this brilliant mind. The other person that came over that was really critical to the modern industry as we know it today is oh shoot, I'm spacing on his name, but he was a winemaker from Piper Heidsieck, and he came over, Charles Fournier.
Yeah,
and
Charles.
Yeah, and so he came over and started making some really amazing traditional method sparkling wines, and so between those two gentlemen, that really kind of set the foundation of the path we're on today. Now, I would say as a industry, we are where Napa was in like the 70s. People kind of have heard of us, but they don't really know a lot about us, and so the movement that the industry's made in the last 20 years, because like I said, I started being involved with the Finger Lakes winemaking community in 2004. That was my first vintage there. And just the movement that we've made since 2004 has been so spectacular to see. And especially the last 5 years has really felt like it's rocketed forward on the global stage. And so the energy there is just palpable. Like every time people get together, like we're all like, yes, we're almost there. We feel it, and it's really cool. It's a very different energy than we have here in Napa. And I love being part of both communities. That's one thing. Like, people always ask me, oh, where do you like better? I'm like, no, I love both of the communities I'm part of, and for very different reasons. And
such diversity between them, and this is. A lot of people would say that's the Napa's lifestyle has sort of created the aristocracy around wine to certain points, and here you have a new district, and in the Finger Lakes, in new meaning in its relative awareness to the general public.
Right.
And so appellation status to grow is, that's like branding a product, which is hard to do in the first place.
Really hard to do. And we're also fighting decades of misunderstandings about what types of wine New York makes, and most people are still kind of going, oh, isn't that all native varieties and sweet and and that's just not true anymore. Yeah. So it's really.
But is
exciting.
it growing traditional Vitis vinifera grapes like Chardonnay and the Bordeaux varietals? And you're getting extraction and color and everything?
Yeah. No, our Chardonnay for Trestle 31 just got listed in Decanter's top American Chardonnays to find.
Wow.
And we were number 11. Like Kistler was on the list, and a bunch of like people that from around Hyde, and then there's us.
Yeah, that's right.
And two other Finger Lakes wineries on that same list. And that's for Chardonnay, not for Riesling. And I think one of our biggest challenges is the fact that everybody has hung their hat on Riesling because it is so easy to grow Riesling there comparative to other varieties. And so that's just what most of everybody's making and what's most planted. And you can generally make a pretty decent Riesling regardless of what's happening. Whereas the other varieties are more technically challenging to get good quality out of. But I feel like we're really coming a long way with that.
Well, John Wilkinson yesterday was saying that you said that it was that you actually get sort of a Germanesque Riesling out of the Finger Lakes as opposed to the California style, which is completely different character.
Right.
And that's important. But in Riesling, there are a lot of devotees of wine, once they start experimenting and tasting, will move to Riesling.
Yes.
Like
Riesling's amazing.
Yeah.
People don't realize that, but it's
a pretty amazing
delicious.
grape. And then much like people will move finally to Pinot Noir or Burgundy just because it's just become so fascinating to do.
Right.
Because I'll go back to this appellation awareness, and I've been working with some Armenian winemakers, and they're actually now internally trying to figure out in the country how they're going to solve their appellation. They should forget about getting it to the world.
Right.
And the marketing of wine is so difficult. But it always fascinates me, and maybe you have some insight, whether it's the palate of the American palate or whether it's the idea that I'm tasting something new and fresh that no one else tastes. I can go to a dinner party and say, I've had Sancerre. Let's just take that for an example. Sancerre 10 years ago, nobody even cared.
Yeah, now it's
now
hot,
you can't get
super
it.
hot.
Yeah. My cousin ordered Sancerre in a Spanish restaurant, and they're like, well, we don't have that here. So
that's ballsy.
But the point is, he doesn't know much more than that except that he likes Sancerre.
It, yeah.
And so I scratched my head to understand if it's because the awareness of the region, or I get to be a consumer that says I know something you might not.
Right. And I think it's a little bit of both. And I think the current Sancerre trend that we're seeing, and it's been going on for a couple of years now, is a real kind of strange boomerang effect from the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc thing.
Be.
And I really truly believe there's been a lot of wine, salespeople out there going, well, if you like this, then you should try this. And then people are like, ooh, I know something, and kind of going back to, I know this thing. But because they're the same grape variety, but made in very, it's
true.
similar but very different styles. Like if you like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, that's not a stretch to get you to like Sancerre. And so I think people are looking at previous trends and going, if a lot of people liked X, they will probably also like Y. And that's why when like the huge Moscato craze went nuts, I don't know, when was that, 10 years ago? Yeah. And I was like, this does not surprise me because California winemakers have been blending in 3, 4, 5% Moscato in White Zen for years.
Right, yeah.
So probably what people really liked about White Zen was the Moscato.
Yeah, right.
And it's very simple to like jump from White Zen to Moscato, and so if you think about it in those terms, I think it's just a natural progression of people want to learn. They want to find new things. And so when they ask about that, they're like, oh, well, if you like this, then you're going to like this other thing.
I think that's an interesting thought. I dealt with salespeople a long time, and it kind of moves into this corporate America conversation, which is, yes, the salesperson's on the street. Their whole income is based on what they sell. They go back to a sales meeting. The sales manager and the vice president of sales says, you're going to be selling this. I'll send you to Hawaii.
Right.
And then they walk into a restaurant and say, by the way, we have this. And it's a trickle effect. It's part of the 3-tier marketing problem. I guess that's part of that. But that's an interesting idea. I didn't really think about that because when I tasted wine on Tuesdays, it was really a thermometer gauge of what was going on in the marketplace. Either what was contemporary because they needed to move it, or what was getting tired and old and they had an inventory, they had to get rid of it.
Right.
Which there are a lot of good wines that way, but because that would explain Australian wines taking their dips and rises and falls and peaks and valleys, as well as New Zealand wines, Spanish wines as well. And so that brings me to the business of wine, which is for the listeners, it's about branding, it's about corporate America. There's been a lot of consolidation on the wholesale side. A lot of great young, small importers have forced out of business or have been gobbled up. You think there's a conflict between the romance of wine and, let's talk about Napa Valley, which people come up, they get on the bus, they go to these wineries, they taste these exquisite vintages versus what they see at the market, the
Right.
Joshes and the
Right.
Apothic Reds. And
Yep. Oh, for sure. There's a disconnect there. But again, you think about Napa Valley, where we are here, it's such a small, tiny percentage of what Californian wine is represented by. And yeah, the vast majority of wine coming out of California are large mass-produced wines, which is nothing wrong with that. It has their place in the marketplace. But because volume is what sells in the three-tier system, there is kind of a self-selection of wines that float to the top volume-wise get moved, and they end up being everywhere. And that's what you see. And that's, some of these companies do it so brilliantly. Like you see Gallo, what they did with Apothic, and, even Constellation, what they've done with Prisoner, love it or hate it. Like that went from, a very, very small niche brand that was kind of cult status to like, it's everywhere now. So
and no one can explain this.
right, but
Right?
it's a volume thing, and if you have volume, then you get attention from the distributors because they want volume. They also kind of like to have those sales where, like, yeah, it's easier to drop 50 cases at a Kroger than it is to go around and drop 6 bottles at every mom and pop wine
for
shop.
sure.
And so that's the real challenge. So I think your original question was, is the romance at odds with the business? I think it depends on the business, because I think there are certain businesses in the industry that have managed to do what they do really, really well. And you have to kind of think of what their end goal is. Like, I heard Rick Tyner speak from Jackson Family Estates several years ago, pre-pandemic. And he said, we are a real estate company that uses wine to fund our real estate investments. And I'm like, that's freaking brilliant. Like, they know exactly who they are. And then they can just buy things and let those brands just keep doing what they're doing, and they don't worry about like blowing things up or exploding, and they just let that go. And then they say, okay, what else can we add on to the portfolio? Like, that's their plan. The Gallo long-term, like, that's such a amazing family-owned company, and who knows what I guarantee you they have a 50-year and 100-year plan. None of us know what it is.
Yeah, right.
But they're making moves now to achieve that, and it will never be clear to us until like 30 years from now, and you're like, oh, that's why they did that. And so it just depends on the company and what the company strategy is. Now, the challenge has become, it's so expensive to do business here in Napa. The land prices are crazy.
Yeah.
The red tape you have to go through to get anything approved in the valley is expensive.
I've heard
And
that.
it's cost prohibitive for small people, who aren't independently wealthy from another industry, to start a wine brand here. Like, I've done it, but I had to start a wine brand back in New York to be able to do it here,
right.
And grow that one for several years to make 60 cases out here, and so
Big brand.
big
there.
brand, massive. But I love making Napa wine. I love making Napa Cab, and to me, it just felt like I had to have something of my own out here. So that's where Feyerua came from. But if you look at some of these wineries today, and there's always this kind of angst over when a winery sells to a larger corporation, who else is going to buy them? Like, it's the costs of doing business are just insane.
The capitalism part of this is important. You got to understand that part of the wine business. And I had reservations over the years watching that happen until, I podcasted with Trevor Derling at BV, and I got this great sense of honesty and reverence towards what BV's history was, and so that escaping the Treasury Wine Estates bureaucracy,
Yes.
and still focusing on what the history with George Latour and
Yes.
Andrei Telechev was like.
Yeah.
I think I was inspired by that conversation because I did have this. You worked at Canandaigua. Let's talk about that for a second. This is a huge company making Four Roses. And my dad had it at his wine shop.
Oh, Richard's Wild Irish Rose, yeah.
What's that?
Richard's Wild Irish Rose, yeah.
Yes, right.
Yeah. Four Roses is actually really good bourbon.
That's the bourbon, right? Yeah. Irish Rose.
I don't want to disparage their.
Let's put it this way: my dad had half pints of the Irish Rose wine and half pints of Four Roses bourbon.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, no.
But those are, that's like, serious difference compared to going to the Finger Lakes or Ohio and trying to create
Yeah.
something special brand.
Well, and I think it's also interesting is like I was working at Robert Mondavi Winery here in Oakville before I went there, and so that therein lies the dichotomy of my career.
Yeah.
Is like I've made
Unbelievable.
everything
Yeah.
at this point, at every price point. But that really was, I believe, Constellation testing me to see if I was ready to take on a team.
Oh,
So I was the red winemaker at Robert Mondavi Winery, and I, in their entire network, was the only person that had East Coast winemaking experience. And when Coley King, who was the director of winemaking before I went out there, retired, they really didn't know what they didn't know. That's my assumption. And so they were like, hey, you know East Coast winemaking. You want to move back there and take this challenge on. The other fun thing that I got to do out there is I started a Finger Lakes brand for Constellation called 240 Days. And Rob Sands was super behind it. And he was like, hey, when are you making me an amazing Finger Lakes wine? I'm like, yeah, whenever you say the word, we will make it happen. And so
Right.
he said, go, and we did. And it was great. We got 90 points from Spectator and
Wow.
Winery to Watch. And,
Wow.
so it was exciting. We were doing really fun stuff in addition to this behemoth that was, kosher wine from Manischewitz and, the Wild Irish
Delicious, right?
Rose and,
Yeah.
making wine at that scale is its own art form. And I really, truly believe that people don't give enough credit to the folks that do that on a day-to-day basis for literally no recognition whatsoever.
Yeah, right. Their names are
Their,
associated on
their
the back
names
label.
are never there. They don't get any
This woman's
press.
a Cornell
They-
grad. She's
Yeah,
making
and for me there, I was not there to make the wine. I was there to support the team that was making the wine, and that was my focus. And so when I got there, that was kind of a different mentality that they had had previously. But I think after my few years there, they realized that things are better because now we have resources to do our jobs more effectively. And so that to me was more of a leadership test than it was a winemaking test, even though I learned a lot about
Yeah,
the different
right.
styles and a lot
Well,
about kosher wine and
Probably a
things
huge
like that.
team, volumes and volumes of wine to make. And you're right. Your name's on the back label as the proprietor of this brand, so to speak. That's a good question that I've been asking lately, and that is how important it is for a winemaker to get experience other than where they've landed. And so you've been in the Finger Lakes. I think you went to Saint-Emilion as well.
I visited there. I never
visited. You
worked
went
there,
there,
but
okay.
I have
At other
strongly
parts
visited there.
Yes, strongly visited. I like that one. I haven't heard that term before. How important it is for a winemaker to have that experience, to try other places. And the question is this. If I've spent 20 years in one appellation, one vineyard, I know those grapes really well, and it takes 20 years to figure them out. Or I've been all over the world, made wines in South America, South Africa, Australia, New World, Old World, and I've got a different perspective, and I'm given the same grapes. I'm going to make different wines.
Yes, and the latter is definitely me. And I think there's value in both. But I know that you can drop me anywhere on the planet,
Yeah,
and I
and
can
figure
make
it
good
out.
wine.
Right.
And that's there's something really comforting in that. When I made wine in China back in 2015, it was that I really kind of pulled on that. I was like, okay, what am I seeing here in the fruit? It's
Who'd you make wine for in China?
Lansai Chateau. So I was part of the Ningxia Winemaker Challenge, and so I made Cabernet in China in 2015.
It took Lafite 11 vintages to figure it out before they would sell it. And so
I could see
why?
that with China. Because so China is a weird mix. It's like the summer of Napa, but with the coldest winter the Finger Lakes has ever seen in the same growing
Wow.
season. And so they have to bury the vines every winter completely under the ground. Otherwise, they freeze dry.
What?
And yes, the vines will just freeze dry and die.
Is that for what? To make sure that we can grow wine in China? What?
Yes, yeah. The Chinese government has said this is where our Napa Valley will be, so that's what's happening. And when I was there in 2015, they only had 10% of the vine planted area that they want to eventually have.
Wow.
So you want to think about 10, 15 years from now, the powerhouse that will be China on their own market. So all of these things they're doing with like the trade agreements and shutting out Australia and all that makes perfect sense because what are they doing? They're protecting their own market.
That's fascinating because and I wrote this, I used the term in the notes I sent you, which is a labor of the Finger Lakes, which is making wine in a district that, relatively new. But I remember going to Millbrook, New York in the 90s in February
Mm-hmm.
and seeing these people in the vineyard with their dry suits on
Mm-hmm.
in 3 feet of snow pruning.
Yep. Snowshoes. Yep.
And
Essential
you have to
item.
really want this.
Yeah.
But now you've got China who's got a government backing saying, no, you want this and we want this and you don't have any choice.
Yes. Basically. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, but can it, will there be appellations? Will there be character? Will there be terroir? Will there be the things that wine enthusiasts seek?
There already is that.
There already
is that. So right now, it's super similar to Chile, and I think you would probably look at Chile and say, "Oh yeah, there's lots of terroirs and expressions in Chile," and the expression in China, especially I'll say from Ningxia because that's where I was, is very similar to the Colchagua Valley, except the tannins are a little more grainy in Ningxia than they are in Colchagua. But it's very similar characteristic profile. I think the industry there is really learning a lot about leaf area management, learning when to leaf, how much to leaf, all of that. And that's really helping improve the wine quality because there's a lot of very bad wine being made there, but there's also some really nice stuff being made. And it's the nice stuff that the places like, Napa Valley have to kind of keep an eye out for because that's the competition eventually.
It's interesting. You talk about the Master of Wine. I've had Peter Koff on, who's a South African, and he was
So
early on, right? And he's a great guy. I used to buy a lot of wine from him, actually. And he's like, yeah, really, we didn't have to know that much. And I've had Emmanuel Comigi on the show a couple of times. He's a master somm. He's like, yeah, when I went through in '96, we had to learn, a little bit of South America, but Burgundy, Bordeaux, and Piemonte, and those places. And all of a sudden, we've added Armenia, Slovenia, we've added Croatia, we've added now China.
Yes.
This
all of it. It's massive.
It's unbelievable.
The amount of stuff you have to know. And that's the beautiful thing about the Master of Wine is one of the things that really scared me about becoming a Master of Wine was the perception that I had to know everything. And what I realized through my studies is I will never know everything. I will never even get close to knowing everything. If I get to the point where I know 5% of the everything about wine, I'm doing really well. But the trick is that you know enough to pass the exam.
Right.
And that really is the focus. And so when I'm mentoring students going through the program now, I really tell them, look, study to the exam. Don't go chasing off some random rabbit hole that you found interesting and go deep into that. Like really look at what they're asking on the exam, what has been asked over the last 5-6 years, and see if you can answer those questions.
Right,
and if you can't answer those questions, go figure out why. Go study for the exam. And so I think that gives you a much better chance of passing.
Well, it's like the SATs and the kids in our neighborhood, they start studying, those questions in 8th grade, and then they get perfect scores. Let me go back to the terroir section because of the China conversation.
Yeah.
And particularly in Napa Valley. And I can see in our next 13 to 20 minutes, we're not going to even scratch the surface on my notes.
If you want a 2.0, we can totally make that happen.
But there's been sort of this generic, fruit-forward, almost high RS version of Napa that's sort of become this de facto standard. And I had a glass of wine with Sharon Kazan-Harris, who owns the Rare Cat brand, Rare Cat, and she's a wonderful woman. And I called her up because she sent home a bottle of Napa Cab. I go, wait a minute, this structure is different than anything I've tasted from here. There's acid, there's a thematic through the whole palate. I was very impressed. She goes, yeah, we can make wines of acid with acid here. But that's not what, I'm not going to throw any names at it, but the mainstream stuff that's selling tons and tons of it, I'm not getting appellated wine. I'm getting just fruit-forward wines. And does that frustrate some winemakers here?
I'm sure it does. You have to think about what sells in the marketplace. And so the styles adjust to what is selling. You saw that with the Parkerization back in the 90s and the early 2000s. Now, like, what's the biggest thing selling right now are sweet reds. I don't want to say simple, but like generally mostly simple, fruit forward, easy approachable wines. And we also have to kind of think about where the consumer is these days is not everybody has a giant cellar where they can sit things away for 10, 20 years. That would be amazing if we all did.
Yeah.
But most of our customers who are coming to Napa Valley aren't. And so those styles that reward them for buying it now and drinking it now tend to be a little more approachable. Now, that's not saying that that is all of what we're doing now. I mean, Kathy Corzin has been like the standard bearer for, restrained winemaking here in Napa Valley for so long. Like her wines are just incredible. Her Kronos Vineyard Cab is one of my favorites, and it's got acid and structure and texture, and the Mondavi wines as well have generally. That's why I loved Mondavi. I've always loved Mondavi, and yes, it's corporately owned, but I still believe the passion of Mr. Mondavi is there. And they're food friendly, they're very fresh wines, but they have the corporate halo, which I think leads a lot of locals to go, oh yeah, that's don't go there. And I hate that because it's such a great, iconic place making really good wine, even though, the last couple of years I was in charge of that. So I don't want to feel self-serving in saying that, but I think for decades that winery has made amazing wine, and that's just the way of it.
It just kills me. And I'm not a wine geek. I don't massage wines. I don't swirl and sniff to the extent and try to make people think I know more than I do. it's the passion and fun of wine is to detect and to taste and to realize you're not where you are sitting.
Right.
And that's a young winemaker from Armenia told me years ago, what other product can you take halfway around the world, plop it on the table, and say this is when and who we were?
Right.
And I think that's a fascinating part of the beverage.
100%.
At the same time, palates change. People evolve. My wife used to drink, fortunately, Gallo Rhine wine, when we got married, and now she's my biggest critic when I bring stuff home. And I had a wine geek lunch the other day with some friends, and one of the gentlemen was saying, I'm just getting tired of drinking Harlan every day. I'm like, wow.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sad for you.
Get to say that, but I thought just for the root comment, which was my palate's changed.
Right.
I want to try something else.
Right.
I think, which is really important.
Yeah.
You said something about the cellar. I had to touch on this. I sold my company 2 months ago or 3 months ago, and after 20 million bottles of wine sold, maybe more, the daily grind of having to worry about internet sales is all done with. But during COVID, they would buy anything I asked them to buy. I was selling stuff way out of my price range that
Right.
people weren't used to buying from me.
Yep.
Didn't matter. Camus 1 liters,
Yeah.
couldn't keep them in stock.
Yeah.
But when that ended, it ended.
Yes.
I mean, literally like the day, like March 17th.
Everybody's like, we're going back out.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so now I have all these great wines. I have to build a cellar at home. I'm in the middle of it right now.
Yep.
And I've got like 1,800 to 2,000 bottles of Grand Cru, Premier Cru.
nice.
I know. I don't mean to say it that way. But I'm like, okay, if that's part of this price, of, the value of the selling the company, I'll take it.
Yeah,
if I
exactly.
can do that, right?
Exactly. Oh, that's
Let's touch on Ohio for a second, because I spent some time in Kentucky. There's purported to be no indigenous wine grapes in California. Zinfandel was, at some point, people thought that, but then they figured out Hazarathi brought it from wherever. But I was in Kentucky, and I had some, Vitis Lambrusca wines, and for the listeners, that's the second tier of grapes, not generally made for wine. And I thought it was pretty good, and I wanted to buy it, and they wouldn't let me buy it because I needed 300 cases, and there was a limit in Kentucky. But you're in Ohio.
yes.
Are you still working in Ohio then?
Yes. So I consult. So I'm a winemaking consultant in
Yes.
addition to running my own brands. And so one of my clients is in Ohio, and he has this amazingly ambitious project of putting Ohio back on the map for wine, because pre-prohibition again, Ohio River Valley, #1 wine growing region in the U.S. And so I am convinced that there is a possibility of finding really interesting terroir there. So we have put in a vineyard. It's primarily what I would call modern hybrids. So hybrids that have been bred in the last 15 to 20 years to not only be disease resistant, but also actually taste good.
Yeah, right.
In what we would consider as traditional wine drinkers as good.
Right.
Because a lot of the problems with the older hybrids is, yes, they're disease resistant, but they just don't make great wine.
Yeah.
And so now the universities have clued into, okay, it's fine to be powdery resistant, but if it doesn't taste good, nobody's going to plant it. And so now the ones we're putting in, Chardonnay, Aramella, Noret, they're all proven to be
Chardonnay.
Chardonnay. It is a dead ringer for Chardonnay, but it is a different variety. So yeah, we're going to see what we can do and how far we can push the boundaries of the quality there. And that's really exciting to me. Like it's exciting to make wine in Napa because you can make great wine here. And you just, to me, making wine here is a personal thing of like, how far can I go as a winemaker with the best fruit in the world? And then you go to the Finger Lakes or Ohio, and the goal is different. You can make great wine here, which I've done. So can I make the best wine possible? And what is that? What does that look like in some of these other regions that don't necessarily have the history that Napa does? And so that's the exciting part of this project is it's just a total unknown of what we can possibly do.
Yeah, I think you mentioned about Prohibition. I think, in fact, post-Prohibition, when Prohibition was not repealed, I repeat myself, it was not repealed. It was just broken up into 50 different versions.
100% agree with that.
That they went right to the Midwest, and they planted muscadine and all kinds of different varietals that were available then to sort of regen the industry.
Right.
Because I guess that's where it started.
It's where it started, yeah.
I mean, Los Angeles was a huge basin of wine in the 1800s. So it's kind of interesting that they would go that now there's a resurgence of it and the idea of planting it. And I'm dying to taste some of these things.
Sure. Yeah.
You know?
Once our, we planted the vineyard this year, so it'll be 2025. We'll get our first crop-ish off of it. We're putting the winery right there in the middle of the vineyard. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to see what we'll be able to do there.
It sounds like they want to use the room.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have people coming.
I understand.
For a tasting. So
I understand.
we need to
But he said 2:00.
I'm sorry?
We'll be done in 5 minutes,
Okay.
and I'll be done.
Okay, 5 minutes.
Looks like I'm editing.
Definitely seems like it.
Well, he's right. We were a little late. All right, so we have a lot to talk about, and I think we're going to do in episode 2. We haven't touched on women in wine. We haven't touched on personal stories of headwinds like that, organic, biodynamic, canned wines, packaging movements. I mean, one of the things that fascinates me with the wine business is now we're moving into packaging ideas. The bin to bottle guy says I've got 2 canning lines here, and not to be aristocratic about it, but packaging movements seem to be not the crux of what wine is about, right? Just because you can put it in a can or a Tetra Pak or something seems like kind of ridiculous. But we're going to save that.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna throw a little bit of a bomb.
Okay,
here.
do that. And then
I am 100% against wine in cans. I've been doing enough work in and around and putting wine and things with high acid in cans that the liners today are not developed enough to be able to manage it and for the wineries to control their quality. It's just not there.
it's not there.
And as much as I love the idea, we all love the idea of it, technologically, we're not there yet to be able to have a consistent experience for the consumer going into can. So there, I'll drop that on
that's a
there.
good point. We'll pick up on that next time. We're up here all the time. We'll do it again. I hope that we have a chance to do it soon because I think this is really fascinating. And your career is amazing, and we look forward to reading more about it in the future.
Okay, great. Yeah, if you want to learn more, novacadamarte.com is my personal website. I have a decade of NovaCadamatre.com. That's correct. Yeah, I have over a decade of blog stuff on there, and just if anybody's interested, feel free to reach out to me on that.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul Kalamkarian. Don't forget to subscribe because there's more great interviews on their way. Folks, have a great time out there in the wine world. Cheers.